All right, I'm gonna force you guys to rewatch this trailer about how socialism did the Trail of Tears. Because holy moly.
In these United States of America, this great country of ours, we American Indians, we can be anything we want to be, except American Indians.
A lot of the soldiers were very aggressive, so the women did get raped.
What we call huelte. Huelte means a place of suffering, dying, starvation, nothing good. Just like
on
Nazi
timeout.
concentration
Yeah, there we go.
camps.
I didn't realize how corrupt things were. I didn't realize what kind of environment we were living in.
We had no running water.
God, I need to after I finish this stream, when I'm about to finish it, y'all, remind me I need to clip out the segment where we dive down this rabbit hole.
We had no power.
They de-incentivize people from, opportunity.
That's why our suicide rate has climbed up astronomical rates.
I moved from the poorest county in America, the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, to the richest area in the country, the Navajo Indian Reservation. There is no difference. The poorest and richest reservations in our nation suffer from identical problems. This is not anything new. This is an everyday occurrence in all tribal governments.
So my life and my tale and my truth has been to fight socialism. And I'm hoping that I can wake up as many Navajos as I can to tell them that you can do this. Yeah, even if I have to fight you to save you. And I think that's what I'm also projecting.
It's true. Socialism has really repressed the Native Americans in the United States.
To my people, even though they are so harsh on social media and they completely hammer at me, I tell them I'll be here even if I have.
Also, she's a QAnon candidate for New Mexico's governor. So, you might be like, oh, she's just crazy. This kind of crazy gets votes, and that's scary as hell.
To fight you to save you.
No, Nindrine, this is just the trailer during the Ben Burgess debate.
What if I told you that this has all happened before? The riots, violence, church burning, attacks on police, destruction of private property.
Oh no, riots have happened before? You don't say.
My name is Sammy Stein.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Okay, they're gonna blame, I guess they're also gonna blame the Holocaust on socialism. Oh no.
I am a Holocaust survivor.
This is the reality of what happens when you have capitalism that goes to socialism.
El socialismo no funciona. El socialismo no funciona.
Just as an FYI, if you're white and a cowboy, you have to recognize you do not represent most cowboys, okay? Most cowboys in the United States were black. Kirk, I love you. Hello.
Welcome back, everybody. All right, no more rules. We can interrupt each other. It's totally voluntary, unlike socialism. I'm kidding. That's my first socialist joke tonight. So let me ask, I want to ask you just kind of generally about Democrat socialism.
Sure, yeah, let's do it.
Where would you point to as 1, 2, or 3 examples that you think are the best embodiment of the worldview that you hold?
Yeah, so I think that that all of the things that I want, I do not think exist together right now. in the world.
Irk, you're gonna make me cry. You're one of my most wholesome chatters and mods, and I appreciate you so goddamn much. Also, Jellyfish, I appreciate you so goddamn much. I hope you're having an easier time. I know you've been under a lot of pressure lately.
But if you want to talk about places where a lot of the policy goals that I'd support, have been implemented, I certainly don't think they're fully socialist societies by any stretch of the imagination.
You are a wholesome chatter, Paladin Lost. A slightly less wholesome mod, but a wholesome chatter.
But I think a lot of it has been implemented. I would talk about, the places you'd expect me to talk about, your Swedens, your Finlands, your Denmarks, your Norways. Now, these are complicated societies that, there are right-wing parties win elections sometimes too, and they do things that I don't like.
I love
but
Ben
think
Burgess.
That these are places, broadly speaking, where a lot has been done to...
What is this dude saying? I mean, it sounds like jibber jabber. No, I mean, basically Charlie Kirk is trying the old, the old question of oh yeah, you're a democratic socialist, huh? Name me one place where socialism has worked. And the argument is well, because we have no previous examples of socialism working perfectly, that socialism can't work. So Ben is trying to kind of both answer the question while dodging it here. Listing out the examples he would talk about, but also signaling that, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, etc., are examples he might talk about. They are not fully exemplary of the position of democratic socialism.
Take certain things, like healthcare, for example, outside of the market so that people have that kind of freedom that I'm talking about, that they're not tied to jobs that they hate because they're worried that they and their families' basic needs aren't going to be taken care of if they don't stay in that subservient relationship. And you talked earlier about how you...
Always worth pointing out, Catalina Gearbox, that China is an authoritarian capitalist nation.
You want the state to support things that are objectively good.
Yes.
It seems to me that living longer is objectively good.
Yes.
Having lower infant mortality is objectively good. And I would also say that having greater...
Oh yeah, no, healthcare being tied to your job is the shittiest thing. One of actually the things that we know from studies done on healthcare and your employment is that tying healthcare to your job means that there will be less economic growth because employees will take fewer risks because they don't want to lose the healthcare for both themselves and their family if they leave their job. Especially if you have a chronic condition, you can't afford to lose your healthcare. So you are then stuck with your job until you feel secure enough to be able to jump to another job. And often that can be decades, if ever. So yeah, no, tying jobs and employment to healthcare is a horrible, horrible thing that stifles innovation, even if you are evaluating it from a capitalist perspective.
Freedom to live your life how you want and not being tied to a particular job, I think that's also objective.
So job mobility is interesting. I want to get into that. So I'm not stunned you mentioned the Scandinavian countries.
Sure, yes.
So Denmark doesn't have a minimum wage.
Well, but you got to do the other half of that. That they don't have a minimum wage, but they have vastly more favorable terrain for unions than the United States does. And
well, yeah. So this is what he's getting at. While Denmark might not have a minimum wage, that's counterbalanced by the fact that Denmark has multiple times over the amount of unions that the United States does. For example, and also not just the amount of unions, but the interconnectedness of those unions is exponentially more powerful in Denmark than in the United States. For example, if service workers for, say, McDonald's go on strike in Denmark, then also that strike will be bolstered by unions in the shipping industry. And the shipping industry won't ship products to those locations. So it kind of becomes bolstered by the effect of these allied union ships. Yeah, Denmark is 80% collective bargaining covered. Right. So, like, even if in Denmark McDonald's wanted to hire scabs, they wouldn't be able to because there's no product being moved into their stores to sell. So, like, they have to negotiate with the union, otherwise it all falls apart. It's that interconnectedness of unions that allow for there to be no minimum wage, because the unions can then negotiate up to a living wage. And by the way, if you work at McDonald's in Denmark, you have healthcare, you have a pension, you have benefits, you have like a month of vacation every year. Like, you have the ability to actually live if you are working at McDonald's in Denmark. If you're working at a McDonald's in the United States, like, you could die and the company would just keep moving along. They don't care if you fucking shit yourself to death, okay?
So a lot of the wage floor is enforced that way.
Wait, what happened during the Nabisco strikes? I heard the truckers refused to ship sugar. As far as I know about the Nabisco strikes, they, or maybe I'm thinking of the Frito-Lay strikes. I don't know what happened during the Nabisco strikes.
Still not just they get whatever the market says they get.
But no government mandated minimum wage. What I find interesting, and there are some aspects of the Scandinavian countries appeal to me.
Sure.
According to the World Economic Freedom Index, every country outside of Norway is more economically free than the United States. And so, is that something that would interest you? If economic freedom is the definition of your view, then I would change the Bernie Sanders shirt.
I think that what I mean by economic freedom and what they mean by economic freedom are going to be very different. I think oftentimes if you look at the methodology of those lists, it's very unclear. Like, you'll get like the Cato Institute or whoever in some cases will do these lists where they rank places by freedom. And it's like, the things that they get points for.
Entrama, if I try and take another sip of this, remind me that I need to finish my water bottle first, okay?
Things they don't get points for. Abortion doesn't matter. Whether you can have raw milk matters. I think are at least unclear to me. But I think this is the bigger philosophical thing,
sure,
though, right? Like, let's just do this rather than getting into the nitty gritty.
Did I get juice? No, I have an energy drink. Also, chat, if we could get like 150 subs tonight, that'd be dope as shit.
About the lists, I think that what those guys mean by economic freedom is how much business owners are free to conduct their business however they want, without interference by the state. What I would mean by freedom in an economic context is the right of ordinary people to live the kinds of lives that they want to live and not be under the thumb to the extent that people are in the United States of whatever some corporation, wants to make them do.
Right. And so just to clarify this, though.
Calm like a Tom. Thank you so much for the gifting of 5 tier 1 subs. And thank you for getting Minimo Sign Saga. I really appreciate that. Reminds me of my friend Minimo Sakurai. Minimo Sakurai, who I haven't talked to in a while because I made her mad, and I'm very sorry.
About some of the Scandinavian countries.
Yeah.
They went through massive deregulation in the 1980s.
Like a Tom, thank you for being based
Many
as
of the
shit.
Scandinavian countries did,
and
including
supporting
Denmark.
my content.
Denmark has actually come out and has said, "Stop calling us socialist. We are not socialist." You've seen that quote.
Well, I have seen it, but here's
okay,
what.
good.
But I would like.
I mean, it's true. Denmark isn't socialist.
I would like to say
Please
something
do.
about this. And people could check out. I actually wrote something about this last summer for Arc Digital Media.
I think I read it.
Okay, well there you go. So
I know where you're going before you say it.
All right, well, beautiful. Fortunately,
but the audience doesn't know. So please
happily,
tell
though,
them.
there are people who are watching who don't know. So
Yes.
let's say it anyway.
Geronimus Prime, I am.
I think that saying that there's here is this center-right kind of prime minister who says, no, these social gains have nothing to do with socialism. And you say, oh, well, he says it, right? So therefore, he must be speaking for, Denmark as a whole, the Danish hive mind, I think is approximately equivalent to if the only two, if you were from Denmark and the only two Americans you'd ever talk to were Bernie Sanders and me, and you said, well, here's what they say about what America's all about. Here's what they say about, Social Security or the post office. This is the American point of view. I think, if you look at how long socialist parties were in power in Denmark and how many of those programs came about under them, I would not say that these are societies that have achieved socialism. We can certainly talk about what that would mean to me. But I would say that these are societies where socialist parties allied with strong unions have brought about really beneficial social reforms as an effort to move farther in that direction.
So let's talk about Norway, a
Sure,
country that I'm familiar with, you're familiar with. Very wealthy country.
Yeah.
Why?
Because I think the biggest reason is that they have done something that I'm sure that you wouldn't support, which is nationalize their oil industry.
You mean use fossil fuels, not keep it in the ground like Bernie Sanders would be. Bernie Sanders has tweeted, we need to keep all fossil fuels in the ground, but Norway's built $1 trillion sovereign wealth fund after.
Okay, so would you support that?
Nationalization? No, but it's better than keeping it in the ground.
Okay,
Sure.
I mean, look, I think ultimately we probably are better off, transitioning to other energy sources, but if we're gonna use oil, I would much rather that oil be in the hands of the people, that it fund generous social programs.
You either need unions or you need to combine the structure of the union with the company itself in a democratic worker co-op. There's really no way around this.
Programs like in Norway, and I often do kind of get a sense when conservatives say this, it's like, oh, well, there's really nothing socialist about it. They've just nationalized the oil industry and used the proceeds to fund all of these social programs.
Well, I mean, if by the way, nationalizing a power source or an economic resource doesn't necessitate socialism. Nationalizing something doesn't mean socialism is happening, right? I think we can all agree that nationalizing something doesn't mean it's socialism. I do like Ben Burgess. I think he's a very smart guy. I think he's right now trying to meet Charlie Kirk where Charlie Kirk is at. With arguments that Charlie Kirk's audience might vibe with. Which doesn't paint him in the best light, to be honest, but that's okay. Yeah, Alaska does that. Alaska, basically, on a state level, nationalized oil incomes. And distributes that oil income to every citizen in Alaska. That doesn't mean Alaska is socialist. It just means that they have some kind of UBI, which, on some level might represent a mildly socialist policy. But socialism implies worker ownership of the means of production, implies that the majority business model in the country is workers owning their workplaces. And none of this really applies.
If that's not socialist, can we at least have that not socialist thing? That sounds nice to me.
Let me clarify, is that if there is wealth to be redistributed, there must be wealth to be redistributed.
Sure.
And Norway has the advantage of having some of the most strategic oil reserves in the country. And I just pinpoint it in particular because...
Did Charlie Kirk mean in the world or in the country? Because in the country doesn't make sense.
There tends to be this anti-fossil fuel development movement.
I mean, it's something Norway and the United States.
And yeah, don't get me wrong. There are some industries that should be nationalized. I do think that, for example, the power grid should be nationalized. Your power companies should be nationalized, right? It's not like there are two competing companies that build power plants in the same town and compete for lower prices for the same market. It just doesn't work that way. And where it doesn't work that way, it should be nationalized. But I would argue that it should be nationalized with the caveat of those places that are being nationalized being democratic worker co-ops. Even the places that get nationalized should have worker representation in those workplaces. Yeah, exactly, Catalina Gearbox. Your power, your water, your internet should largely be nationalized. I think that there is also a compelling case for stuff like sewer garbage to be nationalized. But I think when it comes to sewer and internet, for example, I think the more important challenge is just getting worker democratic co-ops for those specifically. We can get into the nuances of why I think that, but I'm open to having my mind changed on that. I'm just saying from what I've seen. Yeah, democracy in the workplace, even when that democracy in the workplace contradicts the state, I think is a very fair assessment of how these things should work. And I also think that maybe nationalization of food banks to distribute food where it's not profitable to do so, I think that would be good as well.
States have in common is that we have a lot of oil. Now, if you want to, again, I know you've said you don't want to do this.
No, of course, I think the private ownership of minerals is a strategic advantage for the United States. But let me ask...
Yeah, private ownership of minerals. Is it a strategic advantage for the United States for the private entities that own those minerals?
You about what I think is one of the reasons why I think the Scandinavian...
Police unions, bad, okay? No police unions. Police unions should be represented by, like... Honestly, I don't even know how to fix police unions. That is one thing that bugs me, right? Like, maybe police interests should be, like, represented by, like, senators or members of the House of Representatives, and not by, like, unions. I don't know. I'm a bit torn on how to, like, fix unions when it comes to police. Because police have a very unique place in our society that allow them to use deadly force against other people with impunity, realistically speaking. So, like, how do we like, curtail that while also giving them worker rights? And I'm not entirely sure what the solution to that is yet, 100%. I'm open to ideas, though.
Country's pursuit of egalitarianism.
Is it possible to have a democratic military? I mean, I don't think it's possible to have a fully democratic military. I don't think that is possible, because largely a military exists to serve a state and not the members of the military, if that makes sense. I think that if we abolished a world with states and just accepted, like, a anarcho-communist society of some kind where everyone had their needs met, there wouldn't necessarily be a need for a state, and so the need of a military would erode away as well. But I think that is hard to conceptualize where we're at, so I don't necessarily advocate for solutions on that front yet. Does that make sense?
Looks good on paper.
Okay, let's do it.
And this is strict immigration. Now, this has changed in recent years because of a lot of the Syrian refugee crisis and more kind of left-wing governments taking over Sweden in particular. But Norway, for example, takes in about 70 immigrants a day, even with their more...
Bakal Industries, tell me more about your business, and maybe I will be open to this idea. There is a distribution issue because we're almost out of food at our food pantry. Well, yeah, and here's the thing, Jellyfish. The reason food insecurity is a thing isn't because we don't have enough food. The issue is that private companies don't see it as profitable to transport the food to the places it's needed to solve that food insecurity. The state could step in and subsidize the transportation to private food banks all across the country. We could end food insecurity for every man, woman, and child in America. It just necessitates a certain nationalization of food banks to ensure that transportation does happen, even if it happens at a loss. I have a different take. I'm more in favor of getting rid of the idea of states, but have a world government that has an agreed upon set of laws and rights. honestly, I would like to do away with the concept of states entirely, but I don't have like a step-by-step plan to get us to that point, if that makes sense. Like I advocate for the positions that I know we could currently do, right? That's like my entire presence on this channel. I want to be able to tell you guys, well, we could do XYZ, you know? And we can do things like have nationalized food banks where like people can get loaves of bread or eggs or milk or soup, like basic soups, so that they can subsist even if they are making no money. We have the ability to do things like nationalize water to make sure every man, woman, and child has access to clean water in the United States. We have the ability to nationalize the electrical grid. We have the ability to essentially create a society in which we live with democratic worker co-ops instead of privatized businesses. These are all things I have coherent steps we can advocate for, like, for example, having the postal office embrace postal banking, and then having the postal bank embrace like loans for democratic worker co-ops, and having this be a self-sustaining system to increase the number of democratic worker co-ops in society, and over time change our society as a whole as a result. You know, like, I have different ways we could achieve these things. When we're talking about like a stateless society, that's something that is so far in the future that I don't know what that would look like, to be honest with you. I don't know how that world would function. I think it would be a better world, but I don't have a way to describe it in a way that would make it real to all of you, if that makes sense. Abolish the moon. True. The moon's a piece of shit. Always mocking me. Always making me emotional as a woman.
Relaxed policies. America, much bigger country, albeit 2,740 legal immigrants, about 5,000 if you include the people going across the southern border. Do you, as being a Democrat socialist, do you support closed borders and strict immigration?
No, I don't, and I'll tell you why. So, two reasons. One is that I think that, you know, all of the economic data that I've seen says that having more immigrants actually increases the amount of wealth that society has.
Yeah. All of you say the moon is a lesbian. Well, if the moon's a lesbian, have it come down here and hit on me, okay?
Has to go around.
And the cheesy rendition
is I would ask what the alternatives are. Right? So, you know, we...
Calm like a Tom. Oh. I like you a lot. Thank you for coming to my channel. How am I doing? How you doing, Jack? I'm doing okay, Moon. How you doing?
We can do, you know, like those families that, you know, that you talk about, right? You know, we can do things like separating families.
Yo, Jellyfish, you're
like
such a good mom.
You know, churches, you know, to drag out
intro mom.
Immigrants. But I think we would really have to step up that, like, by like a factor of 100 to actually get rid of all the undocumented immigrants in the country. Whereas I think a much better solution, if what you're worried about is, hey, here are people coming in who, yeah, they definitely, you know, contribute to economic growth, but here are people coming in who are willing to work for low wages or whatever. I think a much better solution to that problem is for those people to have a pathway to citizenship so that they're not afraid to do things like join unions, or they're not afraid to do things like, you know, take their employers to court when they violate labor laws. I think that's a much better solution to that problem than the sort of heavy-handed, police state kinds of tactics, which I think would be the only way that you're actually going to resolve the status quo in the other direction.
Charlie Kirk needs better shoes and like a better floor for this set.
One of the things I like about Norway that you just said you don't like is to become a Norwegian citizen, you must speak the native language. It's a non-negotiable. You must have citizenship by birth.
Thank you, Chun-Li. I really appreciate it.
It's not applicable. And you must have lived in Norway for at least 8 out of the past 11 years. And so maybe you can help clarify this for me, because the mascot you're wearing on your shirt has changed on this, because I would understand the position you're espousing more if you said, hey, we're going to close off the borders, we're going to take care of our fellow countrymen, we are going to reject these globalist institutions.
By the way, closing the borders is like fucking 5 head, okay? Like, it's just like the stupidest thing you could do.
Because Bernie Sanders used to say that. In 2013, Bernie Sanders said, it does not make sense to me to bring hundreds of thousands of those workers into this country to work for minimum wage and compete with American kids. Bernie Sanders said in 2007, 6 years prior, if poverty is increasing and if wages are going down, I don't know why we need millions of people to be coming in.
When life gets bad, not only do we have to remember that we don't look like Charlie Kirk, we also have to remember that we have each other, okay? And I really hope I'm building the kind of community that can stand together, you know?
To this country as guest workers. What changed?
Well, I think that the main thing that changed is that the context of both of those quotes that you just read was not about whether there should be a pathway to citizenship. It was about exactly the opposite. It was about the Bush administration's interest in 2007 and then later revivals of it in 2013, attempts to create a guest worker program, which I think he rightly compared to legalized slavery. A lot of immigrant rights groups were actually against those proposals for the same reasons, because those are things that instead of giving people the rights of Americans so that they aren't afraid to do things like organize unions, those are things that would essentially just legalize the status quo. That this is a second tier of workers who are not going to have those citizenship rights.
Chun-Li, I'm so glad you still come around.
Who you can kick out of the country if their employer decides they don't like them anymore.
Thank you,
And I think
Jellyfish.
that is a completely different thing. I think it could also, so I think in that case, I think there's less of a contradiction there than you think. But hey, look, Bernie Sanders is not my shirt, because I think that the man is infallible. I could rattle off a list of things that he's gotten wrong over the years, but the reason he is that I think he's been the most important champion of doing things like raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, like giving everybody health care, ending the wars, etc., that would actually really materially benefit the majority of the population. And I guess I really struggle when I hear, conservatives being interested in the welfare of the working class suddenly when it's this issue of competition from low-wage workers, which is a question of pitting some workers over other workers. But when it's a question of doing things that would benefit workers in general, like raising the minimum wage, like giving everybody health care, then suddenly it seems to be a different story. Suddenly it seems to be that this is too interventionist, this is too administrative state. Kicking immigrants out seems like a big expansion of state power to me too.
Well, I want a small yet strong government. Strong in what it does, and foreign citizens, not foreign citizens, sure, or illegals in the country should be deported, should be taken out. And I think there's a cultural...
Do I have a Discord dinger? I do. Chun-Li, we watch movies. After stream, we've been watching horror movies.
Aspect to it, it's deep down you agree with, and that's what Norway gets right. They realize if you don't speak the language, you don't have a shared culture, then there's something that all of a sudden makes it less like a nation and more like a colony, or more like a temporary place for corporations to make money. Let's talk about the minimum wage. Sure. So the reason why I don't want abrupt, quick, let's say, increases the minimum wage is it actually hurts workers. Washington Post, a very credible new study on Seattle's $15 minimum wage, says the following: workers have seen cut payrolls, they've been put off hiring, reducing hours, or letting their workers go. That is Seattle.
Yo, Anon, thank you for gifting 2 tier 1 subs. I really appreciate that. I really, really do.
Another study from just Target, just because Target raised their wages abruptly in 2019, shows that workers say their hours were cut.
Also, I'm going to be taking a break from this for the next hour or two, hopefully.
them struggling. Another one.
Okay, so
I can go through them. I have a whole packet of them.
Let's pause and do the first
Seattle,
couple.
the same thing.
First
I
couple,
go through New York.
First couple first, because in Seattle there have been a bunch of different studies, including one from UC Berkeley, I know, that have, I don't know which one was published by Jeff Bezos'
Archangel I
newspaper
did.
that you're referring to there.
Trust me, I'm no fan of the Washington Post.
But there was another study from UC Berkeley saying that actually it had no effect on the employment rate in the restaurant industry, and it achieved its goals. I know if you look at the Congressional Budget Office, which oftentimes people with your position love to cite, they said that if you raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, and by the way, I thought it was interesting that you said abrupt, because I'm interested in how, whether you'd be okay with it if you did it slowly.
Yeah, Chun-Li, I'm moving in about 2 weeks, so I feel ya. It's hard, and today has been a really fucking bad day. Yeah, Ravenwood, I agree. It does tend to happen when you're sad and drink, and I have definitely been drinking and been sad. Ambs, good luck with your dentist appointment tomorrow.
I think moderately kept up with inflation, done prudently, especially as we're about to have a period of mass inflation. I think that
Thank you, Sam and
coupled
Moose.
with a workers' tax cut and other pro-growth policies wouldn't be the worst thing for the economy.
Okay.
No, I think that's a moderate economic position.
But keeping up with inflation, right? You know, like you're still saying the purchasing power of low-wage workers should be what it is now. And I would say that if you want to run this...
Yeah. I signed my lease, but also my partner broke up with me. So, you know, a win in column A, a loss in column B. And the loss hits harder today.
This argument that, well, it's actually going to hurt. You know, that's actually going to hurt workers more than help.
The studies show
well,
that it has.
I don't think the studies do show that.
Well, so here's what it says.
So
low-wage workers.
Here's
I'll
why.
let you finish.
I mean, like, I understand what you're saying, that the studies show, some of the studies show that minimum wage increases lead to increased unemployment. That's the big claim that's usually made. Sometimes people will also say that, you know, leads to a reduction in hours, but the big one is usually increased unemployment. And so I'd say two things about this. First of all, the effect of minimum wage increases on employment.
Thanks, Chad.
It's like the most studied thing in empirical economics in the last several decades. And there are studies you can find that say yes. There are a lot of studies.
No need to fight
anyone.
anyone, Chun-Li.
And a word I almost never hear from people who say that it's going to lead to unemployment increases is meta-study, right? In other words, if you look at a bunch of studies over time and see, like, you know, since you could have, you know, very small sample sizes and, you know, and making big conclusions from very small sample sizes.
Femboys are
generally,
super
making a
cute,
big deal about them in the
exactly.
press. That's how people end up believing that plants can think and coffee cures cancer. You know, that they looked at like some study with some super small sample size. But when you do,
I feel like the freeze frame had like Italian hands going on, like, "Hey, femboys!"
a meta study of a bunch of different studies, most of those showed no. But let's say, for the sake of argument, yes. Let's say that it does lead to some unemployment increase.
Because you agree, certain studies do show that.
Yes, certain studies do show that. I think most of them, and especially meta studies over time.
Wait, was that not a clip by someone who's a femboy? I feel like that person was a femboy.
I'm saying no, but sure, let's say yes. So if yes, would that mean that it was going to hurt workers more than help them? Well, we could look at like the Congressional Budget Office, what they said in 2019.
Straight on paper is a very great term. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, the composer, was apparently a cat boy. I mean, from the name, you'd assume dog boy, right? You'd assume Wolfgang would be a dog boy, right?
Which was that 2/3 confidence that you'd have a range of unemployment effects somewhere in between 0 and 3.7 million. And most likely, they said 1.3 million people would lose their jobs. Now, that's bad. I don't want 1.3 billion people to lose their jobs.
That's a lot of jobs.
But they also said that 27 million people would keep the jobs that they have right now and be paid more And
Wait, but then he suddenly tired of it, jumped up, and in the mad mood, which so often came over him, began to leap over tables and chairs, meowing like a cat, and turned somersaults like an unruly boy. Okay, yeah, Mozart, a cat boy confirmed.
And would have more purchasing power. And so we say, okay, we have 27 million people who are being lifted out of poverty by this. We have 1.3
Good night,
million
Morrow.
people
Get
out of
good
jobs.
sleep.
Now, even if there was nothing that you could do about that, I'd still say that treating this as a knockdown, well, this is going to help poor people, working poor people, more than it's hurt them, more than it's going to help them, I don't think makes sense. But also, I don't think we have to accept that those 1.3 million people, if that's the true estimate, have to be permanently out of a job. We could have public works programs that could employ those 1.3 million people, give them dignified, unionized public sector jobs. And if you don't think that there's plenty of work for those 1.3 million people to do in terms of federal...
Who is this content creator?
A small dick, please! Please leave me, it's okay, I'm a small dick! It's not cringe, it's based!
Who is this? Oh, okay, the VTuber themselves is a femboy. I'm a comfy snow angel at VTuber. This person is more popular than I will ever be.
Trust me, I could give you a long list of things they could be doing.
Let me build out the study, and then I want to ask you a question.
Sure.
So low-wage workers on average now clock 9% fewer hours, earn $125 less each month. That's Seattle. There's another one, New York City businesses struggle to keep up after a minimum wage increase. Would you support eliminating the FICA contribution for workers? That's a 7% tax on wages before we even talked about raising the minimum wage.
Well, I'd like to talk about raising the minimum wage with no preconditions, but
why not the workers' tax cut? That's what I always don't understand, because we tax workers at 7%.
Mm-hmm.
7% of our workers here lose their paycheck as half of their FICA contribution. I never hear that from workers' rights advocates. Why?
Well, I think that first of all, the first question you'd have to ask is what's the money that's going to be generated by that for those workers? Then the second question that you want to ask is what's going to be lost on the other end in terms of services if that's cut. And I think that paying people a higher minimum wage...
Are you a femboy? Well, with the right look and a big butt, you too can get the D. Act now and get your very own BBC while supplies last.
Having those 27 million people get a living wage.
I can give them a 7%. I can give them a 7% wage increase tomorrow.
And
it's called cutting the FICA tax.
Yeah.
Every working person deserves 7% of their wages that are currently being taken by them by the government. Why don't you instantaneously agree?
So what are you going to? Well, because I know what the other shoe is that's going to drop there. What are you going to cut to pay for that tax increase?
Okay, so there's plenty. I could name a whole litany of departments I think I would cut to try to pay for it. But let's pretend that it's paid for, like what everything Washington D.C. says.
Yes,
Wouldn't it be worth it?
if you could cut workers' wages and not
wages. The
taxes. The taxes on workers' wages. If you could cut that, and on the other end, there would be absolutely no loss in
FICA is Social Security.
Anything that's a beneficial thing that's going to make workers' lives better, then sure, why not? But I think I think you should still raise the minimum wage, because I think, again, having those 27 million people now having a living wage, having the ripple effects for lots of people who are already making more than the minimum wage, that's going to increase their wages, and then 1.3 million people need new jobs. Trust me, we can take care of that.
So you're
it's true,
a
exactly.
fan of President Trump or his administration. During his presidency, the bottom 10% of workers actually had an income.
Mostly, what I watch these things for is for the left-wing counter arguments. That's what I pay more attention to, because that's where I find more value.
Grow faster than the top 10% of workers, and so what we saw was a real blue-collar boom in the prior administration.
I think what
without having to abruptly raise the minimum wage. And the reason was, let me just finish, is an emphasis on entrepreneurship. This is an indicator that I don't hear talked about a lot, which is how many new businesses are being started. And when you raise the minimum wage, it's harder for the deli owner, the dry cleaner to enter into the market, because all of a sudden the labor pool is like, man, $15 an hour, I could barely pay to keep the lights on. So if we want new business, and you agree, entrepreneurship is a good thing, right?
I think it's good to have new businesses. I'd like more of them to be organized as worker cooperatives.
We're going to talk about unions in a second.
We could get into that.
I want to get deep into unions.
But I do just want to say on what you're claiming about the Trump economy, because I think
femboy content is good content. Also, every single male character in Final Fantasy XIV is a femboy. You cannot change my mind.
This is an important point, right? Why? So yes, sure. Why? What explains those numbers that you just mentioned? You'd say it's a new emphasis in entrepreneurship. I'd say it's two things.
I could go through other things
okay,
too,
but
including an energy renaissance.
But I think the primary things are two things. One, that quite a few states during that time period actually did raise their minimum wage, and I think that had a big effect on that. Two, sure, that employment increases give workers more bargaining power, which a lot of conservatives now object to. They say, oh, nobody wants to work. But employment increases give workers more bargaining power in the labor market, and that's a good thing. But that's not really this new emphasis on entrepreneurship that Trump was doing. If you look at all the employment...
The bald and black femboys? Bald and black femboys are valid too, okay? I follow several 18-plus accounts on Twitter that fall into that category. They're delightful.
Whether you're looking at the overall civilian employment rate in the United States, or whether you're breaking it down, black, white, Hispanic, whatever.
It's pronounced
all
Sugma.
You see the same
What's
trend,
Sugma?
which is that in 2009, at the beginning of the Obama presidency, when the effects of the 2008 crash were really coming in, all of those were way up here. That it was like you have like 10% unemployment. Over the course of the 8 years of Obama, it goes from 10% to 4.7% overall civilian.
I read that in the Darth Vader voice. Danny Boy did great.
Unemployment, and then sure, under the 4 years of Trump, or like we'll give him a pass for the COVID part, but like under those years of Trump, then you go from 4.7 to 3.5. So that is a continuation at an overall slower rate, but a continuation of what had happened before. And the reason I'm bringing that up is not that I'm a big Obama guy. I mean, look.
No, I know you're not.
As you know, I'm a Bernie Sanders would be a good start guy. But...
And I want to get into that, too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I think you are
cleverly
cleverly cloaking your radicalism in three issues that are agreed upon. We're gonna get to the root of that.
I don't think so. I think I front-loaded the radicalism and said these would be baby steps in the right direction. And I'm very confused about how you could be a populist without supporting those baby steps.
We're all Hegelians now, I suppose. Let me ask you this question.
No. But I do want to finish the point, because I think it's an important one, right? That it's not that I think Obama is great. It's that I think that if you're going to say the populist thing about Trump and Trump economics, even though this is a guy who appointed hardcore union busters to the National Labor Relations Board. This is a guy who tried to throw millions of people off of health care, in terms of going against the Medicaid expansion. This is a guy,
Well, so again, y'all, you need to recalibrate your expectations for these debates. The goal of Ben Burgess coming onto Charlie Kirk's platform is not to convince Charlie Kirk, it's to talk to Charlie Kirk's audience and present them with a better argument for leftism than they might have previously been exposed to. Now, Charlie Kirk can try and undermine that, but I think Ben is so far doing a fairly good job at either preempting or counteracting Charlie Kirk's arguments.
Tried to make it a lot harder to qualify for food aid for those families he talked about. That the big populist thing is that he oversaw economic growth and hence job growth. Well, hey, if that's enough to be a populist, Barack Obama was a better populist than he was. And Bill Clinton was a big populist because he oversaw lots of economic growth.
And what I am saying, though, is that it's mischaracterized that the people that you say you care about, the lower workers, actually did really well under those 4 years. I think Trump could have been more conservative, more populist in certain things. And just to clarify on the food stamp issue, millions of people got off of food stamps under Trump voluntarily.
Wait, millions of people got off of food stamps under Trump because they no longer qualified for food stamps?
Voluntarily, because their wages went up. But I don't want to get too...
No, it's not because their wages went up.
I really don't want to get too bogged down on the Trump presidency
you had
thing.
that extra 1% and change of unemployment going down, which is a continuation of previous trends. But
so let me kind of ask you more broadly. I guess we could go into some of these other aspects.
I have a question I'd love to ask you in a minute, by the way, but go for it.
Yeah, you're free to do that too, by the way. Do you trust the government?
Do I trust the government?
Yeah, Danny boy, real talk. One of my better friends growing up was from a biracial Nigerian family. They were really cool. I learned a lot about like Igbo culture from them. Cool stuff. Good night, Ashley. Get good sleep, okay? Thanks for being here.
Do I trust the government to tell me the truth, to do things that no, the government, by and large, that I think that
true PB and Jan,
billionaires, the guy in the shirt likes to talk about, exert vastly too much influence. But here's where I think people often go wrong from that true premise that the government is untrustworthy. I think premise is fine, but the conclusion, therefore, we should have less government, in the sense of we should have less expansive social services.
Wait, Hillstorbeck, what are you eating?
We shouldn't give everybody health care. I think that that's a fundamental confusion, because I think that there's a difference between talking about what the government can do to you, and there we're talking about police, ICE, the expansion of the national security state,
and
what the government has a legal obligation to do for you in terms of supporting what I would see as fundamental human rights like healthcare and education.
Let me tell you where I think there's a flaw in this, and I really want you to talk about this. You say healthcare and education. There must be bureaucrats to enforce these things. You need the administrative state. So then you get the CDC, you get the NIH, you get unregulated agencies that you, as being someone who focuses on democracy, focuses on the power of the people, where is the check and balance against the CDC, the NIH, HHS, for every government program?
Based, Danny Boy. Nigerians are really cool.
You need hundreds of thousands of desk workers, which is where the word bureaucrat comes from in French. So you say you don't trust the government, yet you support expanding the social services, which will then necessarily expand government. Why do you want to expand something you don't trust?
Well, first of all, congratulations on the French vocabulary. I like it. But
I have other words too. We could après nous le déluge, which means after me the flood. We could talk about all my favorite French terms if you'd like. We could do a whole thing. You write for the Jacobin magazine, for goodness sake, so we could exchange notes on Robespierre and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. I've only read the Confessions once. Go ahead.
Okay, well, I'd be happy to do all of that.
Charlie is so eager to show that he has a good education outside of university. He's so eager.
Although, my French is like Duolingo. I can't do that much. But
I'm done, I promise.
But I would say that if you don't want bureaucrats to have more power, if that's the big objection.
No, that's part of the objection.
Okay,
it's an element of it.
Sure. So let's start with that element. So if you don't want bureaucrats to have more power, then the thing that you should really object to, right? Because you said earlier, you think we got to have some kind of social safety net. So we're agreeing that there are some social services programs. We're arguing about how expansive they should be.
It's okay, Danny Boy DeGray.
Generous versus...
I can barely host a Twitch program tonight. And this, so a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. Okay.
This is limited.
Sure. Okay, but this is the thing. If you want those bureaucrats to have less power...
Also, Archangel, when I move, there will be a lot more Only Farmers content, okay?
Don't want limited. That's the last thing that you want. You want generous, and here's why.
You're gonna have to convince me on this one.
I know. Like, I really liked what you just did there. That was some good...
So to restrain their power, you must give them a lot of power.
No, you're not giving them any power. You're taking away their power. It's a really simple argument. Here's how it goes. That means-tested programs give power to bureaucrats. When you say you have to jump through all these hoops to qualify for something, and there's some bureaucrat...
I am a farmer, Draco Wrath. I'm farming the content hills, okay?
Gets to decide whether you get it or not.
Here's why you're
bureaucrats have more power, whereas when you say this is a legal right that every single person has as a citizen, no Canadian is having a bureaucrat
tell me I'm sexy, Danny Boy DeGray. Annoy me.
Decide whether they qualify for healthcare. Or in Finland, you talked about all of the policies that, in Norway that you thought would be an issue for me. Finland
is the poorest
where they have,
country.
Okay, I don't think it's because of this, but
Finland, it's so poor, they're eradicating homelessness.
in Finland, where they don't even have private schools.
Hey, Matthew, how you doing?
You have a right to higher education as a citizen, the way that you have historically in lots of countries, and I think it's worked very well. But when you have that, you don't have students jumping through financial aid, bureaucracy, hurdles, and does this person qualify to get school? Does that person qualify to school? Where bureaucrats have the power to decide what's up, because that's the case where bureaucrats have power over you. If everybody gets something as a right of citizenship, bureaucrats have no power in that circumstance.
But let me ask you something, though. So you want Medicare for all.
Yeah.
Yet HHS is the largest civilian branch of our government. So as we have expanded Medicare, as we have expanded Medicaid, it hasn't been means tested as you want. We have hundreds of thousands of desk workers that are doing the means testing. Are you qualified?
Yeah.
Medicare reimbursements. And so,
good night,
even
Cerulean
for
Knight.
example,
but Medicaid,
it's woefully idealistic. The point is,
Medicaid is a means
you
tested.
cannot have a generous social program without a massive bureaucratic and, dare I say, corrupt administrative state.
Well, I think
Woodrow Wilson would even say that.
Well,
he says, you need the administrative
you
state.
think I like Woodrow Wilson, the guy who
probably he was a college professor. So, and a college president. So he's kind of in your world.
Well, okay. Trust me, neither of those things earn any points for me. But but I think that
that's fair.
But I mean, Woodrow Wilson is the guy who resegregated.
It's me, Natalie Marie. Yes.
The federal bureaucracy after
trust
it
me,
was
I could
integrated.
do a whole speech on
He
that.
put Eugene J.V. Debs in jail. Nobody on the left is going to see Woodrow Wilson as a hero. Liberals. Nobody on the left. But I was just going to say,
I know plenty of people that would, but that's fine.
I don't think you're going to find a lot of socialists.
FDR,
who
LBJ.
agree.
Yeah. Charlie Kirk, famous friend to leftists, knows a lot of people who would stand for Woodrow Wilson.
John Dewey, all these people believed in a strong administrative
Well,
state.
I mean, you're rattling off a bunch of liberals, but that's okay. We don't need to argue about the historical figures. Let's just say this. If you're talking about administrative state, bureaucracy, well, your example is Medicaid, which is a means-tested program. And even at that, even despite the means testing, which is the part that gives the bureaucrats their power, which is also the part I'm objecting to, even despite that...
Wait, Matthew, what do you teach in college?
We're talking about bureaucracies. As I think you mentioned earlier, the government has no monopoly on bureaucracies, plenty of bureaucracies in the private sector. And if you want to know which programs have the smallest overhead...
Hey, Parkside Twan. I'm a switch, okay? I'm a top out of necessity, but I am a switch, okay? Don't you misrepresent me like that. This is slander. I'll come after you.
Right? Even Medicaid, even despite the means testing, Medicaid, Medicare, all of those have much smaller administrative...
Entrama, if I'm a bratty bottom, you're an even bigger bottom than I am, okay?
...overhead than any of the private insurance companies, because the private insurance companies, one, they have to plan out their strategy for competing with each other, and two, the private insurance companies have a vast bureaucracy that is dedicated
They're
to
a power
finding
bottom at
ways
best.
to deny people's claims
Yo.
because they've always got one eye on the bottom line for shareholders. And one question...
Dude, Matthew, that's so cool. What the fuck? I literally studied that for part of my minor. That's so cool.
Question I'm very curious
Please,
about,
it's
by
your
the
turn.
way,
How about
is that
that?
you object for all of these reasons. You think it's too interventionist. You think it's too much administrative state to just providing everybody with health care.
These are all elements of the critique.
Providing people with health care as a human right, so that you can have like what people I know in the UK always tell me, which is, hey, when whatever, my mom got cancer, when whatever the situation is, people will say, the only person I ever talked about this was with a doctor, which is very different from Americans' experience with healthcare. If you can object to that on the grounds that that's too much big government, I am really curious whether you'd say the same thing for fire services? Like would you be okay with it if we didn't have public fire services?
Absolutely not. As I said, small but strong.
Okay.
The government exists, as it says in the preamble of the Constitution, amongst many other things, to secure the blessings of liberty, to ensure domestic tranquility. And
I love how Charlie Kirk will be like, yeah, but like healthcare isn't mentioned in the Constitution, but like we should definitely have firefighters. Guess what, guys? You know who else isn't mentioned in the Constitution? Fucking firefighters.
And Hamilton said it best, that you need a nimble yet effective federal government. Good at what it does, but not overreaching. And that's the whole idea of conservative populism.
True, Matthew. So
framework.
much sex.
I'm a big fan of firefighters, police officers. I'm a big fan of Border Patrol. I'm a big fan of all these sort of things. But when all of a sudden I believe...
I'm a big fan of the agents of state violence.
You get outside of the constitutional limits is where you birth this fourth branch of government. And our mutual hatred of Woodrow Wilson is a perfect example of this, because he really believed the state, this is a Hegelian idea, will usher in that utopia, that the state is God, that through the mechanisms of the state, we will be able to turn the chapter and with it remake man. He wasn't the only person that believed that. FDR did, Lyndon Baines Johnson did as well, where we as conservatives and conservative populists say, hold on a second, that is not what the state is there to do for. Let me just say one last thing, which is that the state is there to preserve the natural law with prudence and wisdom, to hopefully develop families and foster children, not to try to remake human beings. When it comes to healthcare, not only do I have a moral...
Yeah. You know who doesn't deserve healthcare and doesn't play any role in fostering children? Those children having fucking healthcare. Imagine being so bad at making an argument that you're like, yeah, I believe that that a strong state is necessary for like supporting a family and fostering the growth of children, but also healthcare goes too far. Children don't need that.
That it's not the role of government. It's also not good at doing it, and it also hurts the everyday common man. So I have two.
I don't think either of those things are true.
But I have a moral argument, and I also have a utilitarian argument. I just want to make sure that's clear.
Let's start with the moral argument, because I am very unclear on this. Because why is it that having public firefighters or public police is not overreach, but having public health care is? Why would it be objectionable if instead of having public fire services that everybody gets to use?
I mean, Sarsek, it's okay to be wrong. That's fine.
You had everybody just having to have private fire insurance, and if you had a better private fire insurance plan, they'd probably put out your fire, faster. Or maybe we had public fire insurance, but only for people, the poorest people or the oldest people, which would be the exact equivalent for healthcare, or the same thing for policing, the equivalent, for like security insurance. Because all of these things seem very similar to me, because
gotcha.
having your house burned down, being victimized by a crime, or needing chemotherapy, those are all cases where your life and limb is in danger. Like, these seem pretty parallel to me. What do you see as the big disanalogy?
So the first problem is mostly local, police and fire, so therefore it's more accountable.
Okay.
So the dollars don't go to some sort of albatross to the kingdom of Washington, D.C. of unelected, unknown, kind of just unchecked bureaucrats.
Wait, does Charlie Kirk think he should elect your doctor? I'm sorry, does Charlie Kirk think that doctors should be elected? Because you know what that gets you? Do you know what that gets you, guys? Do you guys want to know what, like, electing your own doctor does? It gets you this, guy.
Doctor, what's wrong? Don't you know where to make the incision?
All right, Nick. Don't panic. Think back to med school. Seriously, baby, I can prescribe anything I want. I know I'm supposed to cut something, but what? And where?
Hey! The incision in the coronary artery must be made below the blockage! Below!
Thanks, little girl! The knee bone's connected to the something. The something's connected to the red thing. The red thing's connected to my wristwatch. Uh-oh.
But yeah, electing your own doctors is what gets you Dr. Nick in charge of your entire surgery department.
Two, We do have a system in the country, despite what you're saying, where if you need health care, you will be taken care of. Is it broken? Is it
what
inadequate?
I just said, though, right?
Well, hold on a second. I'm saying it is illegal to deny someone service of care. Illegal. Now, do we have problems with our healthcare system? Do you think if you could put me in a room and I could...
Wait, but hospitals will deny you care if you don't have like imminent life-threatening injury or like an imminent life-threatening condition. They will deny you care based on whether or not you have insurance. Tens of thousands of people die in America every year on this basis alone.
Bargain with you. I think that there are elements of the German system that are admirable. I will say that. Where you have a public system and a private system. Where I start to all of a sudden say time out, no go, no fly zone is where I hear people like Bernie Sanders, and I'm paraphrasing, who want to get rid of private insurance as we know it. That's a big mistake. Healthcare, here's how I think the biggest problem with healthcare is. It's not individualized. It's way too bureaucratic, way too top down. And yes, we have pharmaceutical companies that are addicting people to drugs that they...
Hey, fun fact. A 2009 study from Harvard Medical School indicated that 45,000 Americans die every year as a direct result of not having any health insurance coverage. Wowee! Wowee! Who could have predicted?
Be addicted to. We have a sick care problem in our country, and I agree with a lot of people on the left with this. On this, maybe we'll agree that we have an obesity problem, we have a problem of how we get our food, we have a corporate farming problem. I agree with all those things.
It's true. That was a very unfun fact.
Do I think that a government-run system of healthcare that will be more similar to how the IRS or how the Postal Service works, that's somehow going to be the solution to that? Absolutely not.
Well,
but
I
if
mean,
you put me in a room...
The Postal Service is amazing, and I do not think... I do not
Can you say that again?
The Postal Service is amazing. It has been an engine of...
Charlie Kirk says, what? Are you going to say the Postal Service is amazing again? Because, like, we have better services like Amazon and, like, FedEx and UPS. Services that all use the USPS. Amazon, Amazon, UPS, and FedEx all subsidize their delivery costs by using the United States Postal Service.
Upward mobility. It has been an engine of racial equality. If you building the black middle class, massively an engine of that.
Have you ever used the Postal Service?
I have, and the Postal Service will carry a letter from here to Alaska.
So will FedEx.
For no, not for the same price, and they're certainly not going to serve.
You know it's going to get there.
No, I do not know that, and it's
no, it's not. It's not going to get there. The reason the USPS can operate below cost is because it's not operating with profit incentives. I love his, like, expression here, like he won an argument when he's literally just pointing out that their entire business model relies on subsidies from the American government to deliver those packages. Literally, guys, Amazon uses how many packages it delivers to lower its delivery costs with the USPS. Your tax dollars go to Amazon to subsidize the delivery of your packages, even if you don't use Amazon.
Certainly not going to do it. It's never going to get there with as much service to out-of-the-way rural areas.
I got to give you credit.
Anything.
I've never heard anyone defend the post office.
Are you kidding? Wait, what? Wait, you've never heard anyone defend the post office, Charlie? The post office that was saddled like 15 years ago with the burden of having to prepay its pensions like 70 years in advance. You've never heard anyone praise how the post office is able to do that, despite the fact that, like, no other private business in America is supposed to do that, and yet the post office is able to largely pull it off. That's pretty incredible.
Post office is an amazing institution, and it should be massively expanded. In fact, one of the best things I think they have in some of those Scandinavian countries is postal banking, which if we did that, Bernie Sanders' proposal would immediately put out of business all the payday loan vampires that would prey on unbanked people, would create millions of new good unionized jobs. Postal Service is
So-
great, but I do want to go back because I don't want this. To
I got to
I
capitalize
don't
on
want
this.
this to get
the
lost.
Post Office
though,
lost hundreds
'cause
of thousands of packages and was 6 months late. That's who you want to run our healthcare system?
I think that first of all, I think that if you actually have a fair look at the numbers, I think the Postal Service does do a really good job. I think that oftentimes when people say no, they are not using the same metrics to evaluate it they'd use to evaluate everything else. But if you want to know something that would be very much like what Medicare for All would be like if we had it in the United States, then I'd say looking at delivery of packages is probably not what you want to do. What you probably want to look at is countries like Canada, where they already have Medicare for All, Great Britain, where they've gone further, and
Let me tell you why that's different,
hospitals are publicly owned.
That's all the let's talk about that.
Well, okay, but those are places
That's a different
where,
thing.
Where people live longer, where fewer of their babies die, where the rate of mortality amenable to healthcare is way better. Or look, you said you want it to be local. That you don't like the fact.
Super low.
But by the way, privatized companies and the USPS both have similar loss rates of packages. So like pointing out that like, oh, USPS is losing so many packages. Guess what? So does UPS, so does FedEx, so does literally every other delivery system.
Localized.
Sure, local, great. So
Good night, Ravenwood.
If all the hospitals were municipally owned, you'd be cool with that?
All the hospitals, it would be, well, first of all, that's actually the case in a lot of places. There's county-run hospitals all across the country.
I'm not denying they're county-run.
Actually.
Okay, so you would be okay with that. So it really has nothing to do with centralization.
Well, no, it does. Trust me. The city of Chicago can be equally, if not more corrupt than the Kingdom of Washington, D.C.
Is it going to be more corrupt than the private insurance companies?
I mean, that's a good question.
Okay,
Let me ask you a question.
But you did also say, right, and I really want to make sure
that local is generally better, but
Ben is wrecking Charlie here.
I'm not going to die on the Cook County is a great county hill.
Well, this does go back to what you said earlier, though, when I asked you about fire protection, because you said, well, the difference is that nobody could be turned.
I'm loving this part of the debate because Ben is roasting Charlie Kirk nonstop.
Down from the hospital.
That is a law.
Yes, that is a law. I'm glad that it's a law.
I am too.
Okay, good, wonderful. We agree on that. That is a good government intervention to stop the private sector from doing what it would otherwise do and did otherwise do before that law was passed. But also, I would say
you can see Charlie blinking a lot, which seems to be an indicator of him not knowing what to say.
Do the equivalent for the fire services. That the only people who get it without having to pay at the point of service are the poorest people, are the oldest people. Everybody else has to rely on private fire insurance, which varies wildly in quality. And if you don't have private fire insurance and you're not poor enough to qualify for the means-tested, bureaucrat-enabling system for poor people, and you're not old enough for the other one, and you end up having to have the fire department come and save you anyway, then you have a giant bill that's going to bankrupt you. Do you think that sounds like a fair system?
No. So let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
So is that, here's where, how do you define healthcare? This is a very important.
I love how Charlie just very subtly here admitted that, like, actually, yeah, privatized healthcare is not a good system. Yeah, you're right.
Question, right? Because healthcare could be, hey, I just got a gunshot wound I need to be taken care of. Absolutely. Or healthcare could be, I'm 800 pounds overweight, I'm eating terribly, I have no sort of interest to exercise or eat well. Why all of a sudden should that...
By the way, if you are 800 pounds overweight, that probably indicates that you need a lot more medical intervention. Because people don't tend to get 800 pounds overweight just because they're making bad decisions. Usually it's because of bad mental health, i.e. they have some underlying problem, or they lack the ability to do certain things due to, again, mental problems or physical problems. You might have a pituitary issue, that requires healthcare to fix. It's not just like willpower to overcome it. turns out a lot of these things have underlying biological realities when it comes to fixing the problem. Yeah, guys, if you have too much waste in your yard, well, it sucks to suck. You had too much waste in your yard. Now the firefighters are going to let your house burn down.
Person be put into the same exact level of care of someone.
Yeah, wouldn't you want someone who could otherwise be 800 pounds overweight to get medical intervention when they're just like 30 pounds overweight or like 100 pounds overweight? Like, the problem would be 8 times easier to solve. Like, if you have preventative healthcare, you can solve the problem before it gets, like, astronomically huge.
That has saved money and taken care of their health. Why should someone who's 800 pounds overweight be given in this sort of, realm? Why should human agency and choice have zero emphasis at all?
What you're describing, the only difference between that and what already exists in the United States is that we would have to add, and they're rich enough that they can afford really high quality medical care. Right now, somebody who's 800 pounds, who doesn't watch their diet, who chain smokes, etc.
I agree. Yes,
but
you could add chain smoking.
But sure, all those things.
So you think that none of that should be given a preference?
Well, here's what I'm saying: that I think in the system that we have right now, somebody who checks every single one of those boxes, but is rich enough to afford the best medical care, skips in line ahead of the person who takes care of their health, exercises every day, doesn't smoke, eats well, but lost their job or just is cobbling together 4 part-time jobs like so many Americans are, and thus doesn't have employer health insurance.
It's an interesting question. So you believe just because you have better money, you shouldn't be able to have better stuff?
I believe...
Or more money, better stuff?
I believe that...
Wait, does Charlie Kirk think that just because you happen to be born into a rich family, you deserve better health care than someone who happened to be born poor?
When it comes to something like health care, no.
That's a very broad thing.
I do not believe that people should get life-saving services preferentially because of how much money they have. I think that...
So how much money they've saved. How about that? Someone saved their whole life, and they said, in case there's a disaster, I'm going to put $500 away a month. They get to age...
Yo, if you're putting $500 away every month, like, you get cancer, that stuff's gone in, like, 3 months, okay? You get cancer, your entire savings get blasted through, like, instantaneously.
Age 45, and all of a sudden they realize that they have some sort of health complication. They shouldn't be able to take advantage of the money they've saved for their entire life?
Well, this actually goes back to the very first thing that I said, like the opening couple sentences.
What is justice, I guess, right?
That I said, because what I said is that I don't want some people to have dramatically worse lives than others because of factors outside of their control. Now,
what about things they can control, though?
Well, if we
like saving
money. If we lived in a world where all economic inequality was due to thrift versus indolence or laziness versus industriousness, I would have much less objection to this stuff than I do in the world where we actually live, where somebody who saved up their whole lives, but then they have unexpected medical.
Yeah, have you all considered just stopping being poor? That's the Charlie Kirk world. That's the conservative world. Just stop being poor. Make that mental choice, y'all. Just make the mental choice to make more money, guys.
Expenses that bankrupt them, which happens all the time, that they have, is going to get worse health care than somebody who has never...
And yeah, like, forlorn, I have never made $70K plus per year. Like, I have never made that much money. Like, the most I think I've ever made was, like, 44K. And that was 1 year out of the past 10 years, like... It's not a lot. Story Girl, thank you for subscribing. And thank you for telling me that I'm so cute it hurts. I'm sorry it hurts you, though.
Saved at all, but as somebody if Hunter Biden, right, had some massive medical bill tomorrow,
he would probably have, considering his lifestyle.
Sure, right? So if Hunter Biden had that huge medical bill tomorrow, then he would get in line ahead of people
for multiple reasons, both access to power and also money.
Sure.
So that's a good example.
Those are both bad things, but they have
largely unearned, and I agree.
Sure. So, and I would say the same thing about the Walton children. I would say the same thing about anybody who is inheriting money. When you go to the hospital, or you go to buy insurance, they don't ask you, did this money come from being thrifty and saving your whole life?
Let me ask you a question.
Or did this money come from stock ownership? Or did this money come from inheritance? They just ask, do you have the money to afford this?
And that's part of markets, right? Is that you're not able to make a moral claim for every dollar bill, but generally markets will go towards value and value creation. We're up against the hour break, and we're going to take a short break, and then we're going to resume, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I got a lot more
Also,
I
Story
want to
Girl.
close this thought on one
Story Girl, you a cutie, okay? None of this negative self-talk, okay? I'm the only one allowed to do that here. You're amazing. Yo, Ancom Libra, real talk. I bought I found like a white faux leather jacket on super sale for like $20. At like Nordstrom Rack, and I got it because I don't have any white jackets. It makes me feel so fucking cute, and I will wear it on stream sometime soon. But I don't have a jade green jacket, and that would I would like that very much.
thing, because it goes to your other thing that
Actually, could I mean, if you'll indulge me, could I ask you like a 30-second question?
Sure, because I really want to close that point.
I know we're coming up to it,
yes.
but I'm so fascinated by this,
Sure.
right? So we agreed earlier.
Is it the firefighter thing again?
It's not the firefighter.
Okay.
Although, I think there's more to discuss
I'm
there.
very anti-fire.
They have well, that's good. You should be equally anti-cancer, and then just like we have fire departments, we should have Medicare.
That's why
I am anti-cancer, says Charlie Kirk defensively, while basically stating that poor people should have more cancer than rich people. Also, Story Girl, I'm having a very rough night, but thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
I think people who eat well and don't smoke and make good decisions should be rewarded for human agency.
Yeah, which is not at all what
because the inverse of your statement. I just want to make sure this is clear. The inverse is you say that people should not be penalized for factors outside of their control. The inverse is that I think people should be rewarded for factors inside of their control.
Yeah, and most of what we've got right now is not about.
No, I agree with that.
But
I want a system that rewards people for good choices.
Okay, so here's what I want to ask, real quick.
Sure.
I promise. So. We established earlier how much we both liked Jeff Bezos.
Yes.
Dislike best Jeff Bezos.
Are you going to ask me, should I raise his taxes?
Well, because this is why I'm curious about it.
Because
I saw in 2019.
Yes, with Kyle Kalinske.
Yeah, and he asked you, would you be willing to raise Jeff Bezos' taxes by like 1% to provide housing for every single homeless veteran? And your response at that time was that you'd hope he'd do it voluntarily. And I think at this point we've established that's not going to happen. He'd prefer to buy a spaceship. So
that's probably true. Yeah. So if you put a gun to my head, would I raise his taxes? I mean, I guess if I was a representative.
If you put a gun to Charlie Kirk's head, would he raise taxes on the wealthiest people on the planet to ever exist?
I guess, yes.
Okay, that's good. This is progress. I'm so proud of you,
Let me tell you, I said, I guess conditionally, if all of a sudden there would be a comparable piece of legislation alongside of it that would actually value and prioritize things I cared about. If it was just to raise his taxes.
Things he cares about. Outlawing gay marriage.
Go into the current albatross pit of the administrative state. I'd rather have him buy spaceships than give money to Fauci.
But if it was earmarked for a housing for homeless veterans, and you would say yes.
The answer is yes, because I think Jeff Bezos, from a moral
is such
standpoint,
good progress.
But let me tell you why. Let me clarify why.
Sure.
Jeff Bezos games your favorite department, the Postal Service. He games the corporate tax loophole system. Yeah. Jeff Bezos has a total disregard for what I consider to be the American way of life.
Mommy.
And he has this weird fascination of going into orbit.
Wait, how does he have a disregard for the American way of life, Charlie? He's a capitalist through and through. He's exactly what you want every American to be.
And guess what? I hope he stays there.
Okay, well, I congratulate you on this progress.
Well, I mean, you could call it progress. You could also call it a commitment to prudence.
Okay,
which
but
it's that Greek word prudentia, which is looking at things as they are.
Conservatives have always hated the post office, exactly.
And it's a non-dogmatic way of governing yourself in the country, which is a perfect segue to the question I wanted to ask, because we're going to take a short break. We'll be back here with Dr. Burgess. If we're agreeing too much, don't worry. We'll get back to the disagreement very soon. I'd like to thank Professor Burgess for joining.
I guess they weren't going to get back to Professor Burgess after that segment where Charlie got absolutely roasted. He's exploiting the system in ways Charlie can't. True.